I really enjoy travelling by train, and I think we're incredibly fortunate to have such an interesting and complex railway history in Britain. From the very first steam locomotive to run on rails in Merthyr Tydfil in 1804 to the modern trains that we have today. Well, in a few moments we'll be making an important transition between England and Wales, but via one of the most outstanding examples of 19th century engineering. We are, of course, in the Severn Tunnel. And I can't count the number of times I've done it. And sometimes you only become aware that you're actually passing through this tunnel by a slight change of air pressure in the carriage. I'm not exactly sure how fast this train is going, but what I do know, it only takes a matter of minutes to make that transition from Wales to England or England into Wales. I found a statistic online which said that over 200 trains pass through the tunnel every day, and that got me thinking and wondering about how many million passengers have actually made this journey since the tunnel was opened in December 1886. And here, about 50 meters or so above the tunnel, alongside this fascinating stretch of water, which boasts the highest tides in the whole of Europe. Indeed, it's second across the world, where the western seas funnel in this narrow gap between Wales and England. In geological terms, this is fairly recent, because this area now covered by this magnificent stretch of water and the beach and the tidal flats. Well, that was once a low-lying valley, and about 15,000 years ago it was inundated with the rise in water levels after the end of the Ice Age. People have occupied these shores since prehistory, and recently there's been some absolutely outstanding first-class archaeological research has revealed some very, very important evidence. Archaeologists have been exploring these tidal flats for many, many years, but it was after big storms in 2023 that archaeologists from Reading University made a very important discovery. They found animal and human footprints in the mud that they dated back to over 7,000 years ago. And what I find really fascinating is that some of the prints were made by children, thought to be as young as 4, 5 or 6, there about that. And also they discovered that the prints were in lines going to and fro to fishing traps. Then right here, slap bang against the foreshore, is even more evidence of human occupation, because these banks and the ditches delineate the boundaries of an Iron Age camp that was actually occupied sporadically right up until the medieval period. So I'm standing on the top of a World War II pillbox that in turn sits on the top of the Iron Age fortification. And if I swivel 360 degrees, well, here we have houses from the 21st century just behind me. Swivel around, in the distance we can see the ruined tower of a medieval chapel, and then the huge block houses that once accommodated the beam pumping engines that kept the Severn Tunnel dry. But of course, everything here is dominated by this superb example of late 20th century bridge engineering, the second Severn crossing. Before that, of course, was the much used and quite famous car ferry that operated from the 1920s until the 8th of September 1966. And why am I so precise with that date? Well, it was the day before the first Severn road bridge crossing was opened. Of course, the Romans were here because they threw coins just offshore into the water as an offering to the gods for a safe passage across the estuary. The name Severn is derived from the Latin Sabrina, who was the goddess of the river. The Welsh name is Havren, which relates to an ancient Brythonic princess who was drowned here. The Romans were also likely to have been responsible for starting to construct the sea wall that over the centuries has been enlarged and heightened, and therefore reclaiming the massive area of land that we now know as the Gwent Levels. So over the years, over the centuries in fact, the wall has been heightened and strengthened, but it's a constant battle against tidal erosion. But now the wall runs for some 35 kilometres and carries along its length the long-distance Wales coastal footpath. All the way along this stretch of the coastal path, there's evidence from all periods of history. This rather wonderful, spectacular sculpture by Christopher Wood celebrates the ancient net fishing technique. During the summer months, the fishermen actually wade, sometimes waist deep, into the treacherous waters, using their Y-shaped nets to catch salmon, and they're the very last of their kind, these fishermen in Wales. These are the remains of Holy Trinity Church that may have been close to the medieval village of Sudbrook, and it's thought that due to erosion and flooding that the village may have been abandoned in the 17th century. So how did you actually cross this formidable stretch of water before the modern bridges were built? Well, the options were you could do a round trip of about 60 miles to get up to Gloucester and cross the bridge there, or you could trust life and limb to the waterway. But travelling by water could be hazardous, and Daniel Defoe, coming to Wales in 1725, described this as being ugly, dangerous, and a very inconvenient ferry. This is the Black Rock Ferry, and it was one of the main crossing points over the estuary. So much so that there was the famous Black Rock Hotel, which in addition to providing accommodation for travellers, was also a favourite watering hole for people coming to visit its gardens and for the entertainment that took place here. There was a steamship ferry here from 1826, and in 1863 there was a branch railway line built to connect to the ferry here, and the railway, the trains and the coaches actually ran out along a timber pier to the ferries, waiting to transport them to the other side. You know, by any yardstick, the construction of the Severn Tunnel was an astonishing piece of engineering. I think it must register as one of the great examples of 19th century engineering. But I've been told there's much more information to be obtained just through the door behind me here. This is a wonderful place, and it's absolutely full of information about Sudbrook and the surrounding area. And I think the local history society has done so very well to put this exhibition together. These marvellous photographs, the information on the panels, and what I really love are the items that are scattered around the place here, like the railwayman's outfit there. There's a marvellous collection of clay pipes that's been found on the foreshore, and the whalebone, the whale that was washed up in Sudbrook in 1925. Thomas Walker, the person responsible for the construction of the tunnel, I think was quite a remarkable man, because besides being obviously an excellent engineer, I think he was rather unusual for people at his time, because he was very concerned about the welfare and the working conditions of the people who were actually engaged with physically digging the tunnel. And in his marvellous book, he documents every single detail about the construction, including the fact that 76.5 million bricks were used in the construction, 28 million of which were made in brickworks just down the road from us here. And one of those brickworks, after it closed, was converted into a shipbuilding yard where they made over 100 ships. So there's a remarkable long history of industry in this locality. Visiting this lovely exhibition has really inspired me to get out and about to see what we can find. We're very fortunate to have this book that was written by Thomas Walker about the construction of the tunnel, in which he details all the information, including the fact that there were 3,500 men and boys employed during its construction. All of them, of course, requiring places to live. I've just been told a lovely story by somebody who lives in one of these houses here, and they were saying that when these houses were built, they accommodated 28 people, and because they operated a 3-shift system in the tunnel, one shift would get up and go to work, the other shift would come in and jump into their beds, so the beds were never cold. Most of these houses here were actually built of stone that was excavated during the tunnelling process. And you know, Walker was a quite remarkable man. He built a mission hall that could accommodate 1,000 people, a school that had enough space for a couple of hundred pupils. He built a coffee house, a hospital, and he also converted some of the cottages into an orphanage. It's great. I've been wandering around trying to identify the buildings that Walker mentions in his most excellent book. Found the schoolhouse, yes, that was quite easy. Didn't find a pub and didn't expect to, because Walker was a strong supporter of the temperance movement, and that's why he provided the coffee house. It became a meeting place, and I love the description here, a meeting place for the Severn Tunnel Excavators Total Abstinence Society. And evidently, the coffee house still has a covenant forbidding the sale of alcohol. And this rather fine sculpture by Rubin Ainon actually celebrates the builders of the Severn Tunnel. Oh, this is a smashing sculpture, well, because you can sit in it, but it's also, look carefully, and it's full of information about the tunnel and the people who built it. You know, this book is absolutely marvellous because it's so full of information about how the tunnel was actually built. It says, for example, that the work teams were divided into what were called walking gangs, and there were 50 walking gangs on the Monmouthshire side and 17 on the English side. And each gang consisted of 5 miners, 21 labourers, and the runners out who actually pushed the loaded trucks. Their work was very tiring. It was obviously very dangerous, and of course it was very wet. But in fairness to Walker, he actually had shelters built on the surface where the men could eat their meals and dry their clothes. Tunnelling underneath the estuary, well, you'd expect water to be a problem, but it was especially so in 1879 when the tunnellers hit what they called the Great Spring, which was a massive inrush of fresh water that completely inundated the workings. Fortunately, no lives were lost, but the water came in so quickly that when the men were rushing out of the tunnel, it came in to the height of their knees. And as one of the gangers said, and this is his quote, he said, "The water broke in from the bottom face of the heading, rolling up all at once like a great horse." Well, obviously all work halted for a while, and they had to seal off the spring. And it was through the Herculean efforts, the bravery of this guy, Alexander Lambert, as they say, the daring diver who actually got down in extreme circumstances to seal that continuing inrush of water. And my goodness, if that wasn't enough, in 1883, a 6-foot-high tidal wave swept across the village, flooded the workings, and flooded many of the houses, and people only just managed to get out without losing their lives. Keeping the tunnel water-free is, of course, and has been, a constant challenge. And this massive building was built to house 6 enormous steam-powered beam pumping engines, and they remained in operation until 1961, when they were dismantled, and then the pumps were converted to electricity. Such was the quality and of course the quantity of water that was being produced here that it led to the construction of a paper mill, a paper manufacturing works that operated from 1958 until 2006, just down the road. I picked up a statistic about this place which said that every day 50 million litres of water are pumped out of the tunnel. That's the equivalent to about 11 million gallons. Evidently, that's enough to fill 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools every day. In the 1870s, all that was here was a farmhouse and a few scattered cottages. But within the space of 10 to 15 years was created this substantial model village to provide accommodation for the people who helped construct this absolutely incredible piece of 19th century railway engineering. It's been such an enjoyable experience to make this film because there's been so much history within this very limited area, from those prehistoric footprint makers, from the dwellers in the Iron Age fort, those Roman soldiers who threw away their coins, the medieval fishermen, the early tourists, the Victorian tunnellers, and the engineers who built these quite amazing road crossings. Some of them, of course, we know, some of them are unknown, but they're all part and parcel of this wonderful piece of landscape and engineering history.